Top 10 horror films of 2025.
You're gonna like it.
So I've been a die-hard horror fan for a long time. I haven't done very much content about it, and I thought since it's the end of the year, and since 2025 was yet another fantastic year to be a horror fan, I thought I'd just do a little video about my top 10 horror films of the year. When you look at my list, you might note some absences. Sinners, Weapons, 28 Years Later, all great films that I really enjoyed, but they're on everybody's lists. And one of the reasons I think I was put on this planet is to make more people aware of the enormous world, and I do mean world because it's an international scene, of independent and non-mainstream horror film. So some of you might look at this list and be like, I haven't heard of any of these movies. Well, yes, that's the point. Most of the really exciting and fantastic and amazing horror films that I've seen over the past 9 or 10 years are films that most people have never heard of. So I'm intentionally choosing films on this list that were probably below the radar for a lot of you. So let's just jump in. Number 10 is The Rule of Jenny Penn. This film came out of New Zealand. So The Rule of Jenny Penn centers on an elderly New Zealand judge who suffers a stroke and has to move into a retirement home, kind of against his will. So he's really bitter and angry about being there, and he kind of makes everybody's life miserable. But the plot begins to twist when he meets another older man in the facility whose name is Dave. And Dave essentially is kind of like a sadist. He kind of has this whole, oh, I'm just a confused, quirky old man act that he puts on during the day while the staff is there for the most part, and then at night sneaks out of his room and goes into other people's rooms and basically terrorizes them. And he does all this for this like creepy little hand puppet named Jenny Penn, who kind of speaks for his sadistic side when he goes into people's rooms and does awful things to them. So just give you an example. In one scene, he goes into the bedroom of a man who's kind of bedridden. He can't really just get out of bed by himself. And he throws a cup of urine in the man's face and then brings out Jenny Penn and basically makes him like grovel and tell Jenny Penn how great she is.
Who rules? Jenny Penn.
That's right.
If you're going into this expecting like a kind of horror comedy about quirky old men in a retirement community, you are going to be very disappointed. It is really disturbing and uncomfortable. And I think one of the reasons I resonated with this so much when I was kind of thinking about which films I wanted to talk about is, so I recently moved my aging parents into a retirement community. I'm not like worried this is going to happen to them, but there are lots of stories of awful things that happen in retirement communities, and also just specifically tapping into that fear of aging. We don't really see the concerns or the lives of older people almost ever represented in horror films. If people in their 70s and 80s appear, it's like an archetype or a figure of like, you know, the creepy old witch or whatever, right? As really like challenging and uncomfortable the movie was, you know, it did what good horror does. It makes you empathize with someone in a life situation that's different from yours. So recommend it, but it is an uncomfortable watch. Number 9 is Presence. One of my favorite things about contemporary horror is how many films out there are being made by people who deeply understand the various tropes of the genre. So by tropes, I mean things that you've seen before, right? You know, like for example, the haunted house film. We've all seen that, right? There's a creepy house with some kind of spirit in it, and somebody moves in, and creepy things ensue, and you know, we kind of watch the characters go through this experience of being haunted. And my number 9 film, Presence, does that in a really like kind of new way that I've never seen before, in that it puts you in the position of the ghost. So the entire film it's almost like found footage. It's like first person perspective in a way, but instead of like, hey, we found this camera, it's like, hey, I am this ghost. I'm experiencing the events in this house from the perspective of the ghost. Brief plot summary. It's about a dysfunctional family that has a lot of problems and issues going on, and they move into this house, and one of the main characters has a boyfriend who is manipulative and dangerous and threatening, but they don't realize that. The ghost does realize that, right? So throughout the film, the ghost is basically intervening from the family's behalf, trying to protect them from this like malevolent human character. Presence is the only film on this list that was directed by a kind of like mainstream or maybe like formerly mainstream film director. So it was directed by Steve Soderbergh, probably best known for the film Traffic, which came out in 2000, won a bunch of awards when it came out. It was this big ensemble cast film about kind of the ridiculousness of the American war on drugs. This is pretty much his first horror film, and it's not really scary, like at all. It's much more almost kind of like a psychological drama with a ghost in it. So really innovative, really fantastic. But again, don't go into expecting thrills, expect a very complex human story. My number 8 film is Good Boy, and I'm intentionally putting it after Presence because It really has a similar vibe. Haunted house film, right? Something we've seen 100 times before, but the really, really, really different thing that this movie did was instead of viewing it from the ghost perspective or a human perspective, we're viewing the whole thing from a dog's perspective. So it's not first person, like we're not looking out the dog's eyes. We see the dog going through his experiences, but basically it's about a guy who has a dog. The guy is from the city and he moves back into basically his grandfather's house because he is dying of cancer and he wanted to be out in the woods where it was just more peaceful and calm. So the dog is dealing with that issue, his master kind of declining, but he's also dealing with the fact that there's a ghost in the house. The ghost is a kind of malevolent force. And the whole time the dog himself is experiencing the ghost, but the dog is also watching his master experiencing the ghost. Now, it's not very scary. It's about as scary as maybe like your average Harry Potter movie. It is really, really, really effective and really smart and really emotionally engrossing. Really good horror films get you to empathize with characters who are experiencing things beyond their control. And the fact that it's asking us to empathize with a dog is really new, is really unique, and again, really effective. Like, you really feel for this dog. The other reason I put it on my list is when you learn more about how they made it, it's really fascinating. So basically, this guy and his wife made this film over a period of 3 years in their house with their dog, with their untrained dog, with a dog that was not trained to be in a film. There's a really great featurette at the end of it. It was only like 5 minutes, but I'm really glad they included it because it made the experience so much more rewarding, where they show some of the footage where, you know, in the movie it's like this really tense and creepy moment, but then they show the filming of it and they're like, "Here, boy, look over here," you know, like it's very like cute and heartwarming. And again, the fact that they just made this with their dog in the house for something like $70,000, right? Which is not that much, even for an independent film. And it went on to gross, I think it was like $7 million or something like that at the box office. So whether you're a dog lover or not, it is a really interesting and unique experience. Number 7, Tiger Stripes. So first of all, I'll say Tiger Stripes is a Malaysian horror film. It actually came out in 2023. The only reason I'm including it on my list because it didn't get an American release until 2025. But the film premiered at the 2023 Cannes Film Festival. It won a pretty big award, and then it was released the following year in Malaysia. Malaysia is about 64% Muslim. Because it is such a kind of traditionalist majority Muslim country, it was heavily censored. And the filmmaker basically disowned the the release of the film in her own country because she was so angry about it being censored. And then it got released to Shudder this year. So just in terms of that, it's a kind of unique film. And it also focuses on like a topic that I really care about, but it does so from a completely different cultural context. And that is being a kind of thoughtful, kind of rebellious adolescent growing up in a hyper-religious, controlling environment. So the movie focuses on Zafan, who's an 11-year-old girl in a very traditional Malaysian village whose body and behavior start to go through alarming changes as she enters puberty. Basically, she starts transforming into a tiger girl. And it's really, really, really fascinating to see themes that I've both lived through and seen in other films dealing with kind of religious manipulation and control, but seeing it from a completely different context. One of the joys of being a horror fan is that there are so many horror movies coming out from all over the world, and you get to enter into somebody else's culture.
Kalau kau tak nak sakit, kau keluar sekarang.
You really, really, really identify with this little girl. I mean, she's brilliant, she's fierce, she's brave, she's strong-willed, and seeing her go through this literal bodily transformation as she turns into this like tiger creature thing is both like thrilling and a little disturbing. And I don't want to give away more about the plot, but let's just say that she kind of starts a movement, I guess you could say. Sorry, one of the things I love about being in the basement is you can hear when people like flush the toilet. Anyway, it basically kind of allegorizes the heavy burdens and barriers that, you know, free-thinking people who are forced to grow up in traditionalist religious environments, what they have to face. And again, that is my story, right? That was my upbringing. That's a huge theme in my own life. So that aspect of the film I really resonated with. If you're looking for something that's very thoughtful, very emotional, engrossing, and also something that is told from like a woman's perspective, definitely worth watching. Highly recommended. My next movie is Reflection in a Dead Diamond. This came from Belgium. Not really a horror movie at all, but Shudder released it, and it has heavy horror elements. So it's actually more of like an experimental spy movie. So like, James Bond on acid. So in the 1960s, James Bond was really popular kind of all over the world, and there was this whole cycle of films known as Euro spy movies, which were kind of like often low-budget takes on the kind of James Bond spy formula. So this movie, in some ways, is kind of an homage to those films, but it's also a completely bizarre, surrealistic, like brain-melting, psychedelic take on spy movies. So kind of think like Quentin Tarantino, but if Quentin Tarantino knew how to actually make a good movie for once. And the only reason it appeals to horror fans, I think, is because there are moments of extreme cartoonish gore. So the plot centers on this retired spy in his 70s who's kind of spending his waning days in a French luxury hotel. Becomes really interested in one of his neighbors, who's this young, beautiful woman who ends up going missing. Kind of has the whole, kind of like one last mission feel, where he takes it upon himself to go and find this young woman, and throughout we're learning flashbacks about his life as well. The thing, however, that makes this movie so memorable is just the aesthetics, the visual look. It's been a very long time since I've seen a movie where this movie just has so many different aesthetics smashed into one that even for that reason alone, I wish more people would take this movie seriously and check it out. It really is just beautiful, fun, shocking, and it absolutely deserved to be on this list, so go see it. We're getting to the middle of the list, and number 5 is Fréwaka. I hope I'm saying that right. This movie is from Ireland, which, for my American friends out there, Ireland is a country, not to be confused with Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. They primarily speak English and Irish Gaelic, and most of this film is in Irish Gaelic, which is really interesting. So the film follows Shu, who is an Irish nurse whose abusive and neglectful mother has just passed away. Instead of dealing with that grief and working with her partner to kind of get her mom's affairs in order, she ends up basically just kind of running away. So she takes an in-home nurse job at a kind of like remote and mostly rural part of Ireland, and ends up working for a woman who, surprise, surprise, is completely unstable and difficult and strange. She believes that fairies are real and that fairies are basically kind of coming for her. Now, let me say a few things. In America, when we think fairies, we think of like Tinkerbell, or like really ugly, bookshelf tchotchkes you see at like New Age bookstores or whatever. In Irish folklore, fairies are much more complex and interesting. They're almost more kind of like trickster characters. They can be helpful, they can assist people along in their journeys, but they can also be mischievous and dangerous. And this film presents them much more in that way.
The clock to what Murphinos. No, I'm ready, you must be here.
The genre of this film is folk horror. Folk horror is a genre that I feel like Americans are less familiar with because there aren't that many American folk horror films. It seems like most of the really great folk horror films of the past 50 years or so have come out of places that have much like older and richer folk traditions. So in the English-speaking world, that would be, England, Northern Ireland, Ireland. One of the main themes in folk horror is when modern people forget the old ways, right? The old ways come back to bite you. And it creates this great parallel that she's kind of like dealing with the legacy of her mother while also dealing with this kind of like folk legacy or this cultural legacy that, a lot of people her age have kind of forgotten. For me as a horror fan, I tend not to love folk horror films because oftentimes they're trying really hard to like update and preserve these old folk traditions, put them in a modern horror context. They tend to be a little, kind of like toothless, like not very aggressive or in your face. This movie, however, was a genuine horror film and a fantastic one, and one that I think you should see. Okay, number 4, The Ugly Stepsister. This is from Norway. I can probably count on one hand the number of Norwegian films I've seen, but this is certainly my favorite Norwegian horror film. The Ugly Stepsister is basically a dark fairy tale. So it takes the Cinderella myth, which we all know, and updates it and gives it a really fascinating and I would say nasty reinterpretation. I will say there are some mild spoilers here. I haven't really done any plot spoilers for the other films, but I will say if you watch the film, what I'm going to tell you about it is not going to like ruin your experience at all. So the film centers on Elvira, who's a young woman of noble birth, but she has no money. So because she lives in this patriarchal system that doesn't let women just do what they want, she's kind of forced to try to find a prince to marry to keep them from plummeting into poverty. Problem is, she is conventionally unattractive, meaning that she is not beautiful by the standards of the day. Because of this, she endures kind of like near constant bullying and humiliation for her quote-unquote ugliness. Where still, her mother subjects her to this really like horrific series of surgeries and medical interventions, which includes her nose being broken in two places and shoved into this thing to reform her nose into a different shape. And it really crescendos when she decides that she's going to swallow a tapeworm egg so that she can eat as much as she wants and lose weight. There are several scenes in this movie that really are endurance tests. Bodily ickiness and fluids and parasites. This is not horror for the easily offended or easily grossed out, but I'm telling you, it is so worth it. It's fantastic. The cinematography is amazing. The practical effects are perfect. And it gives this really, really, really interesting twist because basically, and here's kind of where the spoiler comes, she legitimately becomes beautiful. But then what happens after that is, in her state of having conventional beauty, she becomes increasingly desperate and destructive. So she's finally kind of met the standard, but through her like brutal behavior, she demonstrates how evil these standards are.
I've lost my mind.
So ultimately, the film becomes this devastating kind of takedown of beauty standards created by men in a patriarchal society. The way that it often divides people and forces people to do horrendous things to their bodies in order to meet these standards. And I don't know if you spent any time on the internet recently, but doing horrendous things to your bodies to meet beauty standards is kind of in right now. So this movie feels very topical. Despite the endurance sense though, just great film. Please check it out. Number 3, Best Wishes to All from Japan. Don't let the cute, heartwarming title fool you. This is a really, really, really complex, mind-bending, and really, really fantastic film. This film centers on a young woman who is in college to be a nurse. She ends up going home to spend some time with her grandparents, who live in a very rural part of Japan. Basically, while there, she goes through a series of events and experiences and kind of revelations that the entire society that she lives in has these like deep, dark, and disturbing secrets that she has been willfully blind to her whole life. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let me just say a few things about the film to kind of make you want to watch it. So the first thing I'll say, this film is very Lynchian. So if you don't know what that means, let me give a really quick definition. So Lynchian means like the filmmaking of David Lynch. David Lynch was an American filmmaker. He died last year, I believe, and left behind some of the most weird, compelling work in film and art and television as well. Lynchian films are films in which weird, sinister, and just intentionally surreal and unexplainable things happen. And this movie, I think, owes a lot to David Lynch. And that's not a criticism. I think this movie is one of the best examples of taking kind of Lynchian ideas and doing something really different with them.
Eh?
This film obviously is like dealing with cultural issues that I don't completely understand, but they still resonated with me. So let me just give my take. Basically, it's about how much the baby boomers suck. This is a very mild spoiler, but the big secret is that this young woman realizes her entire life and upbringing is basically in service to making sure that the older generations stay fat and happy. That's how I think a lot of Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Zs feel. Like, we're still living in the baby boomers world. Our politics, the things we argue over, you know, Trump, Fox News, all of these things exist in large part because the baby boomers absolutely want to have everything their way and they don't want to share anything. It just feels very 2025, like, right? Like, a lot of us woke up this year and realized, oh, the old people that are in charge of society like literally don't care about us younger generations, and they just want and they want and they want and they want. I don't know how this issue plays out in Japan at all, but regardless, it's a great film. Please check this movie out. Go in with an open mind. Don't be surprised if you're confused. Best wishes to all in seeing this film. Number 2, VHS Halloween. If you're not like a hardcore horror fan, there are aspects of this film that you're not going to be familiar with, so let me just explain them to you. The first thing I need to explain to you is the horror anthology. So horror anthology films have been around since about the 1960s. Instead of watching a full-length film with one story, you get a bunch of little self-contained stories. Oftentimes anthology films will have what's called like a wraparound narrative. For example, in the first VHS film, it's about these like kind of like punk kids who break into an abandoned house and find all these old VHS tapes. And they're really creepy and they're really weird and disturbing. The actual film shorts that you watch is basically the main character watching these movies, right? So that's an example of a wraparound narrative. All the VHS films are found footage films. Now, I know a lot of people, especially a lot of horror fans, are tired of found footage, but the thing I love about the VHS series is that they're really good at taking, again, something that's been done to death, found footage horror, and just constantly surprising me. And I will say, in my opinion, this is the best VHS in the entire series. Let me just tell you about 3 of them. My first favorite short was called Diet Phantasma, and actually is the wraparound narrative. It's basically like videos of food scientists trying out this new product they're developing called Diet Phantasma. Diet Phantasma has a secret ingredient, which doesn't get revealed until the end, but it's clearly something terrifying because in each little episode, they bring in people to try the soda, and in every instance, the soda kills the people in completely bonkers and ridiculous and utterly hilarious and disgusting ways. I also really liked Kid Prince. It starts out kind of lighthearted and funny, but it gets really serious and disturbing. Basically, it's about a small town who is kind of being plagued by this, I guess you could say, serial killer who abducts children on Halloween and films them and murders them. Film is not for those who are easily triggered or easily offended. But again, I would say as a horror fan, if you're going to talk about something like murdering children, it better be uncomfortable. Like, it better be awful. And last but not least, I have to talk about Fun Size. Oh my God, I loved Fun Size. So Fun Size is basically the name of like, I guess kind of like a Halloween slasher villain who lures people with a huge bowl of candy, which says, take just one. And if you take more than one, you get sucked into the bowl, you get sent to this parallel universe where this ridiculous kind of like cartoonish candy man who just runs around screaming, and murders people by chopping them up into pieces and covering their body parts in chocolate. Just an absolute kind of ideal marriage of crazy extreme horror, violence, and ridiculousness, and crazy extreme, wacky, absurd comedy. And this is one of the things I love about the VHS series is they do not cater to mainstream audiences. Like, it's kind of extreme. It kind of pushes boundaries and goes overboard, but that's what I love about it. And Fun Size, man, I haven't laughed that hard in ages. It is just so anarchic and extreme and out of control and hilarious. You have got to see it. My number 1 horror film of the year is A Desert.
Huh?
Yeah, A Desert. That's what it's called. It's called A Desert. The plot follows a liberal big city photographer who travels to an abandoned portion of Route 66 to take pictures of the wreckage of America's past. For those of you who don't know, Route 66 actually was kind of America's first highway in a lot of ways. Back then, highways were just really long roads, but it was abandoned in the mid-20th century when we started building like the interstate highway system, like the highway system that we all think of when we think of highways, right? There are entire communities, entire towns, entire like strips of businesses on Route 66 that are absolutely abandoned. And they're never, ever, ever coming back because it's all in the desert. And along the way, he meets 2 ostensibly kind of like down and out white people and gets mixed up in this debaucherous drug and sex-fueled encounter, which leads to a series of profound disasters and tragedies. I'm not going to say anything else about the plot because it's twisty, it's turny, it's surprising, and it's really, really, really dark. Like, it really drags you through the underbelly of America's kind of worst impulses and even like industries. Why is this movie number 1? Well, I think it's number 1, first of all, because I just loved it thematically. It really explores the divide between like kind of wealthy, mostly white progressive America and really poor white working class America. Another way to think about it, kind of like privileged America versus like forgotten America. I lecture on wealth and poverty issues in my class, and my students are like really shocked to find out like, oh, there are lots of poor white people out there. Like, there are lots of poor white people whose lives are not that much better than, you know, the average kid living in like West Baltimore or Detroit or whatever. That is a reality that I think, and just to be really blunt, like white liberals like, just don't think about and just look down on those people and think they're all just idiots and morons. And this film really dramatizes that in a really brilliant and compelling and really disturbing way.
Nothing happened, man. You're too easy to rile up. You call me a liar. 15, 16.
I'll report a disturbance.
You want to see it? Place where it happened?
I also made it number 1 because it's criminally underseen. Like if you just Google a desert movie, there's hardly anything out there. Like very few people saw this. The only mainstream kind of news outlet that reviewed it was The Guardian, which is a British news site. They literally used the word trailer trash in the title of the article. Like trash? Really? Like you're just gonna put that in a review? And that this reviewer basically, you know, said a really offensive and disgusting thing about poor white people is why more people need to watch this movie. Because again, it's dealing with like deep American issues that we're having a really hard time grappling with. A few more reasons why I love this movie, and this is like the big reason. So it's gonna take me a while to explain it. And I think to do this, I want to kind of pause on this film and pontificate about another film that came out a few years ago, 2022, that I absolutely adore and love, which is Barbarian. Barbarian was much more widely seen, it was much more critically acclaimed than A Desert, but Barbarian did something that I feel like I haven't seen a movie do well until I saw A Desert, and that is completely almost like insane, out of control, piling up of subtexts, right? So again, subtext meaning talking about these larger issues in the world. The film presents, sometimes briefly, so many different subtexts and gave me so many different things to think about that it was just so exciting. So Barbarian explored gentrification, violent masculinity, the Me Too movement, post-World War II white flight out of the suburbs, structural racism, and. Like, it just touched on so many facets of American life that I just found it so like exciting and compelling and thoughtful. Some people would look at that and say, well, it was kind of lazy, like it had all these points that it was making and kind of alluding to, but it didn't make like a strong statement on any of those points. For me, that was like a positive of the movie and not a negative. Even though I love horror films with a really good subtext, like I don't want to be preached at, right? If there's something you want to say to me, don't be obvious. Treat me like I'm smart, treat me like I can put the clues together and figure it out myself, right? And I think Barbarian did that in a really almost like experimental way where it's like, there's this subtext and this subtext and this subtext, right? Just kind of like throwing out subtext. That is one of the reasons why I loved A Desert. Yes, it's about the kind of wealth and class divide between red state and blue state America, or kind of urban and kind of white rural America, but it was also about capitalism and the way that we completely abandon communities that are struggling. It's also about like addiction and police corruption and violent masculinity and some of the kind of seedier, darker corners of kind of online pornography, cultural disconnection and dislocation. It just had so many subtexts and gave me so much to think about, and I just so deeply enjoyed watching this film. Also, it features David Yao of the Jesus Lizard, and I'm just not going to explain what that means because I know the 5 people watching this who understands are going to be excited about this and go watch the movie. Now, one warning, this movie is very adult. It's actually rated NC-17, which I didn't even know they gave NC-17 ratings anymore. There is a lot of very perverse and I would say violent sexuality in the film. This movie is not for those who are easily offended. But man, it is smart, it's thoughtful, it's original, it's brutal, it's beautiful, and it's so deeply American. If you give this movie a try, I think you will not be disappointed. Oh, and please watch the movies. If you end up watching the movie, leave a comment down below, tell me what you thought. Please like and subscribe and share this video if you thought it was interesting. I'm really trying to build a following this year and maybe like try to do this kind of stuff for a living. So if you like what I'm doing, please support me because I barely have any time to do this stuff and would love to do it kind of full time. And as always,